welcome to the Church Brand Guide Podcast. This is Michael Prasad. I'm so glad you're here today. Man, this episode we are going to be talking about establishing a brand and having a long-term mindset so that you're creating something that's not just a short-term gain, but something over the period of time where you're going to see some tremendous results, some life change taking place. Your church culture will begin to make a difference in the world. Steve Jobs used to say that he wants to make a dent in the universe. Well, I love that mentality. Why can't we as churches, as leaders, begin to make a dent in the universe, so to speak, with what we're doing? And a brand is basically allowing us to be intentional about that. Putting the right words, the right visuals, the right components together to where we have a long-term plan to reach the people we're called to reach. The other powerful thing about a brand is that it forces us to think outside of ourselves and towards the people we are trying to reach. There's a definite target audience that God has equipped us to reach as church leaders and as church creatives. And when we have a brand and a brand strategy, then we are able to think strategically about what it takes to reach those people. And that's huge. Healthy churches are churches that have a new flow of people coming in. So there's always new faces. There's always people that don't know Christ as a part of the mix. And as a result of that, they think differently. They communicate differently. Churches that don't have new people coming in begin to be this very club-oriented thing where there's just the same people showing up from week to week, and they start to get weird. So when you have new people coming in, you're always thinking, how can we be welcoming? How can we host people and be very inviting so that new people are always coming in? So having a brand strategy is really, that's the big idea. Allowing people that are new to come in and feel welcomed, to learn about the culture of the church, to learn what the church has to offer, and to want to be a part of it, to learn about the story of your church, and then say, hey, I want my story to now be a part of this story that's going on here. So we talk in this episode with Barbara, and she unpacks how companies, the successful companies, the bigger ones, have a good understanding of this, and it results in them setting aside a budget to make this happen, because they realize that having a strong brand is essential to growth. And the same applies to churches. Having a strong brand is essential to growth. Many times, the benefit of the brand, having a brand strategy, is just bringing unification and alignment to the church culture so that everything is working in the same direction and you don't have these different components happening on their own, creating silos within the organization. Everybody's working together towards the same goal. So that's another big, huge benefit about being intentional about a brand. So with Barbara today, we're going to be talking about her agency and how she works with different companies, but then also has had a shift in recent years where she came to know Jesus and now is serving churches primarily. So this caused her to shift her whole business, and a really neat story that you're going to learn about in this episode. And the other thing we talk about quite a bit in the episode is just when is it time to rebrand? So that's a big question, because a brand has a shelf life in many cases where, after a while you begin to change and develop and grow, and maybe some things happen, some new leadership comes, and it's time for a rebrand. So we help you unpack when it might be the right time for you to rebrand your church and what that begins to look like so you can make that decision. So let's get right into the episode with our guest. And Barbara is with Word Revolution. So she's been in an agency for quite some time, serving businesses and also churches. So you'll want to hear her story, her perspective, especially as a new believer, and learn about how any church can begin to appeal to new believers and create this very healthy, thriving, energetic culture. All right, welcome to the Church Brand Guide Podcast. This is Michael Prasad. I'm here with Barbara today, and she's a special guest that's going to help us unpack branding. So Barbara, I'm going to let you just take a moment to introduce yourself and kind of your background. Can you tell us what your story is?
Sure. Well, thank you, Michael. It's been fun to listen to the podcasts that you guys had so far. And to tell my story, I mean, there's a fun part of that story that I would like to share with you, and it's just how I ended up, at with church communication. And the truth is, I've been in communication and marketing, design for quite a while. But something happened about 6 years ago, and that was fundamental in my life. So I came to Christ, and in that moment, it was a moment where I realized, okay, a lot of things are going to change. I didn't really quite know what was going to change, but I thought this is the time to quit this, design thing that I have going on, because, things are going to be different in my life now. And I remember clearly being in my kitchen one day cooking and having this really strong impression of God saying, "I didn't ask you to quit anything." It was very clear that God was saying, "I just want you to use the talents that I've given you, and all of the gifts that I've given you, the ability to design. I just want you to use that for me." So the shift that happened was we actually rebranded, which is kind of funny because that's what we're talking about today. So we changed our name. My company became Word Revolution because that's what happened in my life. The Word of God changed the way that I lived, and it changed my business. So we became Word Revolution. We started engaging with churches and ministries, and that's how we ended up where I am now. So.
Wow. So tell me, before you you made this change, you were in graphics and design and communications. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I've been professionally as an agency for the past 10 years. I had done some work prior to that, mostly just freelancing and things on the side, working for friends and family. But professionally, it's been about 10 years now.
Okay, great. So you had
Yeah.
this great encounter, and then your mission now has shifted. And so
Yeah.
we were talking. So I met you just a little while ago, and we had a great conversation about branding and churches. And you were just telling me how you're just so passionate now to help the church and churches in general begin to do branding better. So it was a neat story.
Yeah.
Really kind of overlaps a lot of my story. But what does that look like for you? How are you doing that?
Yeah. So at first, we addressed it from a perspective of, let me just be a provider for churches. Let me just help them with branding, which I think it's needed. I find it that some of the people that come into church communication, they ended up fulfilling that spot or that role because there's a need for it, and I believe there is a need for that. But at some time, and sometimes what we see is that they lack some of the knowledge or the expertise to create something that will be the identity for that church. So I thought, okay, we can come alongside and we can be the ones creating these brands, creating the new logos or rebranding altogether, and helping churches with what in my opinion is one of the main parts of their communication. But in some point in time, I felt compelled to simply share our knowledge, to simply share with other churches out there, what are agencies doing when it comes to logo design? How can we apply not just the techniques and tactics, but also the strategic part behind building a brand. So even though I've written an article about it before where I really hate using the word church and community and marketing together, although that's in many ways what we're trying to do. And I don't like saying church and brand as well together. I feel like the word kind of makes me a little, uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's how we portray ourselves. It's how we communicate. It's how we present ourselves. So even though I have this desire to find a better word for it, there's a lot of things that we can apply to the church because we're communicating with people. We're engaging with people. We're presenting ourselves to people. And those people on the other side of each church, they have eyes, right? They're going to see before they actually get to know you. There's a lot of first impressions that happen before you even get somebody to come to your church. And I believe the first step is the brand, is your identity.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we run into that too as we work with churches. We'll run into the idea that branding maybe doesn't apply to churches, or marketing doesn't apply to church world, because there's maybe a higher
Mm-hmm.
calling or just a different way of looking at church ministry in general. Or so I guess one of the obstacles that we come up against quite a bit as a design agency is just helping to
Mm-hmm.
educate that branding really does apply to churches. And it's something that
Mm-hmm.
God is conscious of. As I read the Bible, I read it through my lens of being a branding creative person. And so I tend to see it, when Jesus said, "Hey, be fishers of men, follow me and I'll make you fishers
Yeah.
of men." I see that as a challenge, that fishing is a challenge, and speaking and
Mm-hmm.
appealing to people is a challenge. You have to learn who they are, how they react and respond to different things, so that you could put the right messaging out there so that they can respond to it. Is there something I guess,
Yeah.
in your mind that kind of stands out to you, maybe even on a biblical sense, or where you can make
Yeah.
more of a
So
connection?
yeah, so there's a couple of aspects of the Bible that I believe, in my opinion, are clear about. I mean, we all know that God is a creator. That's how the Bible starts, you know. So there's all that concept of we were made in His image, and therefore we have an ability to be creative. And this is not going to be anything new to any one of us that is already working with some sort of creative aspect in our churches or even at work. But there's also another part, which is when you think about Jesus, you think about him being a storyteller, and storyteller in any kind of parables relies heavily in imagery. Why? Because an easier way for our brain to assimilate information and to learn and to remember. And so, if Jesus himself is using imagery to explain and make it clear for us what his teaching stands on, why wouldn't we use the same thing? So when we think about branding for the church, I think what we're just saying is let's spend some time and be intentional about how we want to portray what we stand for. It doesn't mean that we're branding from a perspective of, you know, of marketing in the sense of reaching a market in the as businesses refer to, but there is an intentionality there that we shouldn't ignore. You know, it's almost like me saying, I don't care about the people on the other side of me if I'm not spending the time thinking about what's going to relate to them, what they're going to connect with, what they're going to understand. And that's, I believe, the main point about what we do. I mean, when I say we, I say all of us communicators, is that we need to start from the people. And I mean, nothing gets closer to the gospel than that. Starting, you know, having a heart for the people that God has placed in your life. And that's, in my opinion, what really makes a difference when it comes to designing something, is if you have that person in mind, that group of people in mind that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the things we get trained in as designers, is that we need to look at our audience first and then try to appeal to them. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
in the church world, that's something that's forgotten, even though that's kind of what I come across, I guess. Maybe when I'm presenting an idea or a concept, I find that I have to maybe represent that idea to a pastor or
Mm-hmm.
to a creative director. In fact, I came across, there's a great verse, 1 Samuel 16:7. It says, "People look at the outside, but God looks at the heart." So there's actually
Mm-hmm.
two statements being made in that verse. The second one is the one that we kind of emphasize, especially in church world. It's God looks at the heart, and I think we understand
Right.
that. But the first part of that verse says people look at the outside. And I think
Yeah.
we shouldn't overlook that, because people really do look at the outside first. They need to they're emotionally engaged by what they see and experience, and then they'll decide whether or not they want to go deeper with that experience.
Yeah, yeah. And you also see many times in the Bible this idea of come and see. I mean, there's something about our vision that in many cases the Bible addresses, because, you know, even Jesus says that himself, and some of the disciples as well. Come and see, just come and see. come and see for yourself. And the way we design a brand needs to touch on that as well. It's the first connection. It's that first engagement point that you're going to have with somebody. So neglecting it is pretty much saying, I don't know if I care about what your first impression is going to be.
Yeah, there's actually a great book that, I don't know if you've read it. It's called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. He's basically
I have not, yeah.
Okay. It's the basic idea of the book is that there's about 2 seconds or so where people are going to make a judgment about something. And then after that point, whatever they see or encounter, they're trying to reinforce that first impression. So as designers, as an agency, I think we begin to understand that, like we're trained to look for that and begin to create that great first impression. That's why, we pay, or companies will pay to have a great logo designed and great brochures, and it just looks clean, and it's, So I think companies begin to understand what the purpose of this stuff is, why you put a lot of emphasis into creating a great looking website. And then churches are sometimes can overlook that. But I think, one of our missions, my mission, your mission, is to really help churches begin to understand the importance of those things. Can you speak? Can you speak?
And in touching...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were going further. Go ahead.
I was saying, in touching that demonstrating the importance, just as you mentioned the 2 seconds, I've heard it before that it takes about 7 minutes for somebody to make a decision if they're coming back to that church or not. And, by 7 minutes, chances are you haven't heard the sermon yet. So basically you're basing your decision on the things that you see, right?
Yeah.
Because you haven't heard anything yet. You may have seen a sign in the parking lot. You may have seen, a greeter at the door, and, the signage to take you to the kids ministry section, but you haven't heard the message yet. So...
Yeah, my story recently is kind of that same experience. My wife and I were looking for a church, and we with the church that we decided to go to. Basically, we experienced it before we even talked to the pastor or heard a sermon. We walked in, we saw there was a great ministry space for kids. We had just had a baby, and that was super important to us. So the fact they had murals up on the wall, great signage, the rooms were well designed and colorful, spoke volumes to us that this church cares about our kids, and that was important to us. And then we walked down the hallway and we came to that cafe, and they have all this mission stuff up on the cafe, like you could see where their missionaries are and where they're supporting people. And again, that was like, man, this is great. This church is outwardly focused. We could see that without even talking to somebody. We could see that. And that really, in our minds, was the starting point of like, hey, this is going to be our church. And it did. It became our church after a while.
Yeah.
So
isn't it interesting that you could sense that they care for children just based on how they communicated?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They didn't have to say anything. We didn't have to talk to a teacher. We didn't have to sit into a classroom. We just saw that they put a lot of time, energy, and effort in creating a great kids space, and that said enough.
Yeah.
So branding within companies, you've been doing this professionally, like you said, for quite a while, even before focusing on the church side of things. So companies begin to get this. Can you unpack maybe what the companies see and what you experience, like when they come to you and maybe they need a new brand? Just unpack that for a second.
Yeah. So companies, I feel like there are, you will find the spectrum of companies that really value, and some companies where you need to kind of educate them a little bit. At least in my experience, there is that as well. But overall, there is this idea that we understand that this is the very first big step I need to take when it comes to growing my business. It's almost like there's an assumption there that I can't move on with other things until my brand is strong and, it sits in a solid rock because it's my identity. And so when you think about companies assigning a budget to it, it's just like us in our personal life. you assign a priority to the things that you know are important. Some people exercise, some people have good diets, some people spend time with their kids, and because those three things follow in the category of these are important for me. Doesn't mean that exercising is not important if it's not a priority for another person. No, it just means that they haven't seen the importance of that for their lives. The same thing is true in a business and in a church. Is your brand not important? I don't think that's true. I believe it's always going to be important because your impression is always going to be communicated. The question becomes, what are you communicating? And not communicating is a decision. And so when you decide this is not important for me, you will inevitably put something out there for the people that will have an engagement with you. So wherever you sit in your level of engagement with your people, either a business or a church, you're always going to have these touch points, right? People will see you either through social media or because you gave them a business card or because somebody told them about you and they're going to check your website. Those engagement points, every single time you're going to have this, what do I get out of looking at this? What is this communicating to me? They may not think about it, but internally their brains are going through that process of, can I trust you? What is in it for me? Can I trust you? Can I trust you? So the can I trust you is a big question that people will do without even knowing. And we do that for any brand we get in touch with, any brand we interact with. And then, if you ever done a road trip, you probably drove by some restaurants where you thought, I cannot trust you. And maybe the food was delicious and maybe they were the best in town, but because they were communicating in a way that didn't satisfy that trust, that need for trust, they lost a client. So are we willing to lose past buyers because what we're putting out is not trustworthy?
That's really good.
And I think business have figured that out. A big chunk of them, obviously you will find everything in between those two extremes. But I've seen clients really pay attention to what their brand should be in their marketing mix, and you can tell that they understand it because if you watch TV or if you engage in social media, you understand that brands is your first point of engagement with anybody that's trying to sell to you.
Yeah. I love the point that you make that you're always communicating. So whether or not you're being intentional about that, you're still communicating. You might as well be intentional.
Yeah.
So whenever somebody steps into maybe a church building, you're communicating. What do they see? Is it clean? Did they have signage that takes you around the facility and shows you where the bathroom is? Does it make it easy? Does it make you feel welcomed when you walk into the facility? Or does it feel like a club where you feel like an outsider, and you have to ask to get around? So you're always communicating. I love the point that you make with that. The other point that you made. Go ahead, Barbara. Go ahead. Did you want to add to that?
I was going to say it's interesting that we use the word feel a lot. I don't know if you've noticed that. We keep repeating this word, makes me feel this way, or I felt that way. And it's touching on the psychology of us human beings. And I'm not saying we should go for the feelings of people for the sake of going for the feelings of people, but that's how we emotionally connect with people, and that's how we emotionally connect with brands, and that's how we're going to emotionally connect with the church as well, is how do they make me feel? Especially if we're dealing with unbelievers, and I'm hoping that most churches have an outreach program, and they're intentional about reaching out to the lost. We want those people to feel that they are welcomed and, they can trust until they can believe, if that makes sense.
No, that's real good. That trust factor is a huge one. And every church should be asking that because they aren't going to care about your message until they know that you care about them and they can trust you to a certain level. And everything you put out there is trying to build that trust. So your website, is Is it mobile optimized? I mean, can they trust that you're, relevant to the culture today? Can they see, what's happening in your church by going to your website, get a good feel, like there's that word again, get a good feel for what type of a church you are, if you're going to take care of them and, have good things that when they come. So you're always communicating, you're always trying to build trust. And like we were saying with companies, I think that the companies that understand it, they put a budget, a number behind it. They're saying, hey, we're going to spend, X amount, X percentage this year on helping our brand become a better brand through marketing and creating media, improving the website, different things like that. And that's where I think churches can learn, just generally speaking. Some churches do a great job at this, but they can learn to put that budget aside so that they can be intentional about communicating.
Yes. So budget is always that word, isn't it? Like I feel like we all try to find a way to run away from the word budget, in our lives and as churches. And but the reality is, it goes back to that idea of priority. What are the things that I'm prioritizing? And I have kids. I know you have kids, and when I look at their education, for example, or some extracurricular stuff that they do, that for me is not seen as a cost or as an expense as much as it is seen as an investment. And when I say investment, that means I'm expecting something in return. And the last thing I want to bring to you is say, let's look at ROI and return on investment. But obviously, I expect a result from this investment that I'm making in my kids' lives, right? Investing in my daughter learning piano is, for me, something important. And because I see the importance, it doesn't become, I don't look at it as a cost, if that makes sense. I see that as an investment for her future. And so it comes down to having a long-term vision. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's what I see sometimes that businesses have. They have a long-term vision that allows them to understand, okay, where will I put my money? Where will I put my priorities? Where will I put my investment, my time, my people? And there is a significant amount of growth that you get from having an identity that is solid, in my opinion, because everything will flow from that. I mean, any marketing piece you put out, any business card you design, any brochure you ever create needs to sit on this identity that you have. And so, a logo is not just a logo. A logo is how you, when you think about a brand in that sense, is how you're perceived. And that's why I insist on it needs to be a priority, and we need to focus on the people on the other side of it. I was asked one time by a pastor, the challenge was very intriguing. He just said, ask 3 people, 1 family member, like somebody very close to you, someone that is an acquaintance, and someone that is maybe like from your work, where you have a relationship, but it's not like a personal relationship. And the question is, ask them, how does it feel to be on the other side of me? And it was interesting to hear the responses. It was, I was very surprised by some responses that I got from, for example, one person that worked with me. And obviously from my husband, it was pretty funny because it wasn't new to me, but the way he expressed it was very new to me. So we will never have a clear perspective of how we portray ourselves because we're not on the outside of that bottle. So the perception that people will have of us and of any church and any business is always going to be different than what we want it to be. There's always a variation. So by going through the exercise of actually being intentional, what I'm doing is I'm reducing the risk of that, that image being so different. I don't want the person that is on the other side of me to have a perspective of I'm a bad boss and I treat people poorly.
Right.
And what I want to be portrayed is like, I'm a good boss and I want to treat people, the right way.
Yeah.
So by being intentional, I reduce this gap. I'm saying, okay, I need to be intentional about being somebody that is a servant leader, somebody that is so anyway, it forces me to think about my identity. So who am I as a boss? Or who am I as a wife? Or who am I as a cousin? it forces me to think about that. So has the church done that? Has the church sat down and thought, who am I as a church for my neighbors?
Yeah, very good. Very good. I think there's certain things that churches are excellent at. There's definitely this whole, relationship thing is a very strong thing that churches do well. Most churches. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the businesses are not better than churches, like as we're having this conversation. They're just stronger in certain areas and churches are stronger in other areas. Our heart, I think our passion, what we've talked about is that we would love for the church that is doing great in, what churches are good at, serving the community, building relationships, life change.
Yes.
We'd love to see them be really good at this other side of it, creating these brands that allows them to do even more of it, have way more resources to do even more of it. And that's kind of where our passion is coming from as we talk about a lot of these concepts.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. So what are some practical things that you've seen that churches do that to create a better brand? So you've been working with some churches, and is there anything just specifically you could talk to that's like, hey, you should do these things to start creating a great brand?
Yes. So the first thing is to ask questions. Just as I was talking about this identity, let's sit down and ask questions like, who are we as a church? How do we want to be seen? How do we want to be portrayed as? And who's around us? It comes down to people. So my approach to branding is always to start with the people. Who's around me? And I have, for me, it is very clear that God has placed pastors in specific cities as a calling. Like, I want to believe that all pastors are called to a certain location. And we have seen pastors being called to cities where there's already another pastor. So why would God put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pastors in the same cities? Because we're all supposed to fill in for a different function of the body, right? Not to say that we have different messages. We're all going to preach the gospel and we're all going to teach the same teachings. But there is a high chance that one church is going to be more prepared to serve families with young kids, where another church may actually be very well equipped to deal with college students, and another one may be in a very good position to deal with youth or the single. We are to receive everybody, and we are to be welcome to everybody, to welcome everybody in our church. But there is, for sure, a certain group of people that you better prepare to serve. Are you aware of who they are? Do you know who they are? Because if I'm designing a logo for a church that is, for the most part, better prepared to serve families with young kids, that logo is going to look one way. If I'm a church that is very well positioned at a college, and I'm, very well prepared to serve college students, my logo is going to look completely different. My mission is still the same, but the people on the other side of me are different. So I want to make sure that I'm communicating with them in a way that relates. So asking questions, I need to know who's around me. Who are we better prepared to serve? Do we have the ability to serve the Latino community, for example? Because if I do, then first off, I need to have my logo somehow in Spanish, right? So that's, question number one. But also, there are things that are very particular to the idiosyncrasy of a Latino that is different than an American. So there's so many different items that will come to play, but I can prepare this design just looking for something that looks good, or I can prepare this design with this intentionality that we've been talking about. So asking questions. We need to, and I believe leadership needs to be a part of these sessions where we ask questions. Every time we engage with the church, we make sure that, the leadership is present, because we want to have the input from those that have information that will be useful for us. When we start asking questions to churches before we start designing their logos, we just start with basic questions. Tell me about your church. What are you guys good at? What are you really excelling at? What are the things that you believe differentiate you from your neighbor? Not because you're better, but because you're different. And so asking these questions in a setting that allows for a very open discussion will give you some insight on who your audience is. And talking about audience is always that thing, right? Like churches will say, well, we want to reach everybody. And it's true. We want to reach everybody, and that will be the desire forever. But our time is limited, our money is limited, our people are limited, and the truth is our resources are not infinite. So we will be limited in our ability to do things. The question then becomes, who are you better prepared to serve today?
Yeah.
And that's how we start. We start by asking questions. In fact, you may be surprised about this, but we actually spend 3 meetings of 1 hour each with the leadership just to get these questions answered.
Oh, that's good. Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm hearing, the great starting point is to define a logo, and not just a logo, but the right logo that's unique to the calling of that church. Mm-hmm. So I think, I'm just, as you were talking, a lot of thoughts were going through my head. That's so good. So that should be a process. It should be something that you work through, wrestle through, with the leadership of that church. And I think as a good, a good designer is going to help to bring up questions and poke in certain areas to really pull out the right answers from the church leadership so that they can then be intentional about what the design looks like. And from the logo, we're talking everything else kind of comes after that. So that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that it takes, a pretty good amount of time, several meetings and all that with leadership to get that down.
Yeah. Solid 3 meetings. Sometimes we need to go to an extra one. And I'll gladly share with you guys the questions that we use. I can, just send you a list because they don't change from client to client. They don't change from church to church. But we go all the way to asking things like, what are the questions that I wish my neighbors were asking that they're not asking me now? Like, somebody comes in for the first time. What's a question that they're not asking me that you wish they would ask? And man, that gets the leadership thinking, in a way that they've never thought about. They never sat down to think about these things. Another one is, what is the number one question I get asked all the time? And the reason why we ask this question is because let's say a pastor is asked all the time, do you have a kids ministry? Do you have a kids ministry? This is giving me 2 indicators. I'm not communicating well that I have one. And second, maybe my audience needs it and I can't provide it yet and I should think about it. So if that's a question that I get all the time, there's an indicator there that should put us in a place to decide on, is our identity changing? And by the way, church's identity will change over time as you grow. Not your identity in Christ, and let me be clear about that. Your identity as a brand, as a So you may come to a position of starting as a church plant, and 10 years later you're growing. And what does that mean to your brand? Does it need to be adjusted? Does it need to, be redirected? I believe we as churches are, in an ocean and we have our sails up. So, for me, prayer and the Holy Spirit, put your sails up. You basically say, God, send the wind and we'll go as you send us. And that's how I believe the growth of the church happens. I don't think we're the ones responsible for that growth, but we are responsible for taking that wind and, putting the sail up and saying, yes, God, I will go where you send us. And so as you grow, chances are your brand will need to change or be adjusted or be refreshed, or there are a few things that in my opinion will change over time.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's maybe a profound thought for a lot of people out there, the idea that your brand might actually change from one point of time to another as your church matures and kind of goes in different directions. So we encounter that too, like where a church comes across us and they're like, hey, we would like a new website. And then we get into a conversation, and what we realize is that they really need a new brand based on what they're saying. So I think I'd like to give permission to people to think differently about that. Once you have a logo or something in place, it's not something that maybe is a permanent thing for the next 50 years. you should be open-minded enough to maybe rethink it after a certain period of time.
Absolutely. And if there's a group of people out there that should be open to this type of growth, is the church. And as you start, and I've had the chance to be a part of a church plant, and it was just 15 of us when we started, and it's now a group of 500 people. So as you start, there's so many variables that you're not aware of, that you don't know. And I've seen churches, for example, inherit a previous church, and now they need to rebrand because they're merging, for example, or they need to rebrand because sometimes even a changing leadership happened. But there are moments of simple growth where you're not doing anything, nothing bad is happening. In fact, I think good things are happening. So what happens when you're suddenly at a capacity where you can actually have a building, and you have, you're in a very good place to deal with the youth and the younger kids. Will that be reflected in your brand? And it's not because culture changes. I think this is the important point that I want to make. We don't want to follow the next trend just because the next trend is available. We want to follow the growth of our church naturally. And I hope every church out there is growing, so.
Yeah, real good, man. That's really good information. I think churches should take to heart. We've redesigned or rebranded some churches here recently. And it's been a really nice process because we're better able to shift their brand from what they have been and then move it into where they're going based on, recent developments. And I think there's probably 3 things that we've seen where a new brand is needed or is a good opportunity for a new brand. One is when maybe there's a new pastor that takes over, there's a new vision as a result of that. The second one is a new building program or new building facility or expanding for some, one reason or another. And I think the third thing is that just over the course of time, the shift, like you were talking about, has been made where you're focusing on a different audience for whatever reason. You've just found yourself where now you were one way, but now you're shifting more to a different audience. If any of those things have happened, it's probably a good time to look at your logo, your branding.
Absolutely. And when we started at that church plant, we were at a restaurant, and so the kids ministry was in a booth.
Oh, wow.
Like a restaurant booth. But there was 4 or 5 kids. Now, what happens when you see your church grow towards having more families with younger kids? Naturally, you're going to see, other people that are similar being attracted to that same church. And again, I want to clarify that we're not excluding anybody. By creating a logo that resonates with the mom with kids doesn't mean I'm excluding anybody. And the way that I explain to my church clients this concept is, just look at Chick-fil-A. I mean, we all love Chick-fil-A. We all know Chick-fil-A. I always ask them, who do you think Chick-fil-A is targeting? And they start thinking about it, and I was like, I don't know. I was like, well, Chick-fil-A is targeting families with young kids. They have a playground. They have booths with 4 spots, which will fit a family with kids. Does it mean that an older lady can't go get Chick-fil-A? I mean, no, she can go with her friends. Does it mean that teenagers can't sit down at a table and eat? Of course they can, but they're better prepared to serve family with young kids.
I love it.
And that's kind of how we try to explain to them this idea of we're not excluding anybody, but you need to find a target. You need to decide which direction you are going.
Right, and whenever you find that target, that's when you make the most traction towards growth, whatever that means. You have laser focus. You're able to focus on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in contrast, Chick-fil-A is one way. Think of Starbucks. That's a completely different environment. Because the audience it's different. The audience is different. So I love the practical examples. Hopefully that helps out our audience quite a bit. So as far as just completing this whole practical starting points, the logo is huge. Probably a website would be a great next step for a church. Maybe do you have any further thoughts on maybe the top 4 or 5 things that a church should do if they're going to create a strong brand?
So the website is definitely the next step, because nowadays we are in what I call a thumb scrolling society. The first thing we do when somebody tells us about something is go check it out, and we're mostly on our phones. And the truth is, even when I'm in front of my computer, if it's a quick search, sometimes I'll just grab my phone because I'm just so accustomed to searching on my phone. So having that presence online is going to be my first touch point, most likely. I mean, even if it's a friend inviting me for, hey, come check out this church, I'll most likely check it out when my friend is not looking, and I'm going to see what's this thing all about before I say yes, right? I want to see what kind of, what's the expectation? And let's remember, we're trying to reach non-believers. So I want to make sure that I know what I'm getting myself into before I go, if that makes sense. That's probably one of the main questions they have. They already know it's a church, but, let me check this out. So website is going to be fundamental. And because of the society we live in, we need to make sure it's responsive. Nowadays, if you do a website that's not responsive, it's probably not a good idea. I think that's a nice way to put it. What else? I think it's always a good strategy to have some sort of communication card. As people get to your doors, you want to make sure you start collecting some sort of contact information. Maybe it's just a prayer request, maybe it's a phone number, maybe it's an email, but start getting a way to get in touch with them after they leave that service. So I find that if you get those three started, that will give you a good starting point. Obviously, depending on where your church is, depending on the resources you have available, depending on the size of your church as well, you may start increasing on your communication efforts. But even as a church plant, think about it. You're going to need signs for sure, because chances are you don't have your own building. You're probably using a theater or a school, and signage is going to be fundamental to getting people through the door. This is basic, communication stuff. If you go to a concert, if you go to an event, if you go to even a birthday party at someone's house, you see the balloons in the mailbox. So it's just making it easier for the person to get to where they want to go.
Very good. So you were unpacking the website. So starting with the logo, develop a great website, have some sort of communication card of some kind, and then also having some good signage. So if a church has those things in place, this should be set up to then begin to reach people and expand in the future beyond those things. No, I really like that.
I believe so.
Yep, that's good. I think with the communication card, I love the idea of being able to know who's there. So even if it has like a little bit of a survey to it, how'd you hear about us type of thing. That'd be a little added feature you could probably add on there. So that's real good.
Yeah.
Great. Barbara, thanks for hanging out with us. I think it's been really good to just hear your thoughts on churches and branding and how they can create this strong brand. Is there any obstacle that you've seen that churches have that's like, consistent that they have to overcome to create a strong brand?
Yes, and it comes down to budget. That's the biggest obstacle that I've heard in the past. So it takes, if you are a church communicator, if you're the one speaking to your leadership about doing your brand, sometimes we come with very vague arguments of, other churches are doing this way, or we need to be consistent. And those are obviously very valid, but they don't necessarily address the objection that the leadership may be considering. So all they're thinking about is this is a cost. So the way that we deal with an objection is showing that it's not a cost, that it's an investment. It's a long-term investment in the way that people are going to perceive us. So the way that I normally help churches visualize this is by pointing back to people, because that's what matters. That's, we're not talking just about a cute little file in a brochure. We're talking about the people on the other side of that brochure. And the second is just focus on that idea, the idea that this is a long-term thing, not a cost, like, this is such an expensive cost right now. It will have an impact that will last for a long time. So
really good. I think one of the
Yeah.
things that we found too is that it's you're dead on as far as being an investment. If we can help churches think of this as like an outreach type of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times there's a mentality shift that takes place on that. So we just worked with this church, and it's called the Evangelistic Center, and we had Justin on last week's episode 18. But he talked about how they rebranded themselves, and over about 3 years or so, it's a completely different environment. The signage and new website, new logo, brochures. They even have a room that's designated just for visitors to come in and learn about the church. So one of the things we talked with them about early on was think about this as part of your outreach budget. So if you're saying, hey, you're going to go into the community and do certain events throughout the course of the year, think about this in the same way. You're going out to reach out to people. And we actually presented the idea that they could do a campaign and actually raise money towards outreach, which then goes to help a lot of these upgrades take place within their church, the organization, so it becomes more attractive to people.
Right.
And they
That's
actually
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so they went through, that's how they found a lot of the budgeting that they needed to, let's say, redo a website or to redo some signage in the building. They presented this need to their congregation saying, hey, we have this need to reach our community that's right outside these walls, and we need to do some things to make who we are more attractive to this community. And they did. It raised money, and it was able to create a bigger budget, at least for a while. And then they gained some momentum to where now there's not that much of an issue moving forward to be able to do stuff like this, because now the church sees it. They see the benefits, and then they're now on board to do more of it.
Yeah, yeah. You see, it comes down to people. We need to remember that we're in this for the kingdom of God, and His heart is for His people. And that's what we need to keep in mind. And and whatever you do it for the Lord, right? But this is one of those things that it's not just a cute design. That's what I keep saying. I don't just design cute things. This is far beyond just a nice little swoosh.
Yeah.
It goes to someone, and we need to remember there's people on the other side of each logo.
Very good. Oh, wow. That's a quotable line there. I like that.
There you go. You got your tweet.
Oh, that's great. Love it. Well, Barbara, thanks for coming on. Is there a good way that people can connect with you if they want to just engage with you further, maybe on social media or something like that? Do you have a good way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a church communication strategies group on Facebook. If you just search that, church communication strategies, you will find us. Feel free to join. And my website is wordrevolution.com. Again, God changed me through His Word, and that's what my company ended up calling, like the name we gave it. So my email is barbara@wordrevolution.com. So feel free to reach out as well. But I would love to see you all in the Facebook group.
Yeah, and it's a great group. We're a part of it. It's neat to see those conversations happening. And so, yeah, I would highly encourage, be a part of that, see what other people are doing, what other people are talking about, throw some questions out there. It's a really neat dynamic. Well, thanks again, Barbara, for sharing everything that you have with us today. It's been really good. And we'll kind of keep up with you. I know you've got some big ideas coming up in the future, so we'll keep up with you, and maybe we can talk about those in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks. Have a good day. Bye. I just want to take a moment to thank Barbara for being on the show, and she actually mentioned a resource that she would provide for everyone that's listening. It's a list of questions that she goes through with churches when she helps them to rebrand. So we have that link on our show notes page. So if you go to churchbrandguide.com and you go to episode 19, you'll find that resource at the bottom of that show notes page. Just want to invite you to join us on Facebook. We've got a great Facebook page that you can check out, and also on Instagram. And every week we like to leave you with a resource. So this week's resource is it's a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. It's by Al and Laura Reese. and they unpack what the great brands of the world have done to create great brands. So they go in greater detail about what is a great brand, how you can make a great brand, and it's just a wonderful read if you're just curious about this stuff and you want to find out what it takes to build a great brand. They talk about bad brands too and why they're bad. So it's a great book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Once again, just join us on our social media channels. Leave some comments on our show notes page. There's a comments area at the very bottom. We'd love to have a conversation with you, answer any questions you have, and just interact with you more. So thanks again for joining me this week, and I'll see you next time.